There's a version of you that exists only in a folder on your desktop. A screenplay that's 40 pages in and hasn't been touched since March. A business plan with a name, a logo, and no customers. A gym bag that's been sitting by the door for 3 weeks, still packed, like it's waiting for a version of you that hasn't shown up yet. Your phone has 41 unread matches on it. You'll get to them. Your mother has texted twice this week asking if you're doing okay, and both times you've replied, "Yeah, all good, just busy," from a bed you haven't left in 6 hours. Somewhere on your feed, someone your exact age just closed a deal, bought a house, posted a ring. You feel the flash of something ugly and familiar. Not quite envy, not quite grief, and you close the app, open another one, and let the feeling dissolve into someone else's highlight reel. Tonight, you'll tell yourself the same thing you told yourself last night. Tomorrow, you'll start. Tomorrow, the conditions will finally be right. And somewhere underneath the scrolling, a quieter, older question keeps surfacing, the one you never quite let yourself finish. If I'm so capable, why does nothing in my life actually move? Psychologists have a name for this, and it isn't laziness. Carl Jung called it Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy. Not a diagnosis, but an archetype. A grown man who keeps living as though the real version of his life hasn't started. As though everything happening now is just a rehearsal, a placeholder, a for now that quietly becomes forever. Jung had another phrase for it that cuts even closer. He called it the provisional life. You're present in your own body, but not fully invested in your own existence. You watch your days rather than live them. Nothing gets your full weight because putting your full weight down means it could break. And if it breaks, you'd have to feel that. Today, this pattern travels under friendlier names: Peter Pan syndrome, failure to launch, the man-child. But strip away the punchline and there's something much more precise underneath it. A nervous system that has learned, early and thoroughly, that not trying hurts less than trying and losing. It's tempting to think this is just a personal failing, a willpower problem, a discipline problem. But look at the numbers, and it starts to look less like an individual character flaw and more like a pattern with roots. In the United States, close to 1 in 5 adults aged 25 to 34 are living back home with their parents, and men make up a disproportionate share of them. Men are now a minority on college campuses, roughly 2 in 5 students, and among the men who do earn a bachelor's degree, unemployment in their 20s is running nearly double that of women with the same degree. Something structural is happening underneath the personal story. The economy stalled the runway, but that doesn't fully explain why some men, given every opportunity, still won't taxi to the end of it. That part comes from somewhere earlier. Jungian analysts point to what's called a mother complex, not "he loves his mom too much," but something more specific, a childhood where protection never fully receded into independence. Sometimes it's smothering, a parent who never let the child face a consequence long enough to build the muscle for facing one. Sometimes it's the opposite, a permissive household where no one ever really held the line, so the child never learned where the line was. Either way, the result looks similar on the outside: a grown man who has never once been forced, by love or by necessity, to stand fully on his own weight. Clinicians studying what they now call Peter Pan syndrome describe both parenting styles, overprotective and overly permissive, as reliable precursors. Different roads, same destination. An adult who never quite finished becoming one. And here's the detail that makes this so much more interesting than simple immaturity. This isn't usually a man without talent. It's very often the opposite. He was probably the smart one, the one teachers singled out, the one who finished the assignment in half the time, the one who was told, early and often, that he was going to do something. And that early proof of ability becomes its own trap, because somewhere along the way he starts to believe that competence should be automatic, that if something is hard, if it requires the boring repetition of actually building a skill, it must not be his true calling. So instead of sitting with the humiliating middle stage of learning, the stage where you're bad at something before you're good at it, he reaches for something almost more comfortable than success: unrealized potential. I could have been great at this. It's a sentence that never has to be tested, which means it can never be disproven. It costs nothing and protects everything. Watch the pattern closely and it repeats like a heartbeat. A burst of inspiration, a furious few days of effort, the business idea, the workout plan, the screenplay, the apology he finally rehearses in his head. Then the first real obstacle, the first flicker of "this is harder than I thought," and the whole thing goes quiet. Not because he failed, because he left before failure could reach him. It's less a rocket that crashes and more a rocket that never leaves the pad. Engines lit, countdown started, and then, at the last second, someone kills the ignition. Failure to launch isn't just a phrase. For a lot of men, it's a literal repeating event. This is where the story of Peter Pan stops being a cute metaphor and starts being uncomfortably accurate. Neverland isn't really about magic. It's about a place where nothing has to end, nothing has to be finished, and no one has to answer for anything. J.M. Barrie wrote Peter as charming precisely because he never grows old enough to be held responsible for the wreckage he leaves behind him. Holden Caulfield, a century of English classes later, is beloved for the same reason. His entire personality is a refusal to become one of the phonies, which is really just a refusal to become an adult at all. There's something genuinely seductive in these characters because they let us imagine staying free of consequence forever. The tragedy is that Neverland was written as a place children escape from, not a place grown men are supposed to move into. It gets even more tangled in relationships. A man living this pattern is often magnetic at first, full of plans, full of energy, endlessly interesting to be around, because someone still mid-fantasy tells a better story than someone grounded in ordinary reality. But eventually, the people closest to him discover that his disdain for commitment isn't limited to his career. Clinicians describe a recurring dynamic where these men gravitate toward partners who unconsciously function as caretakers, cleaning up logistics, softening consequences, managing the parts of adult life he's never learned to hold himself. It works for a while until the partner burns out from carrying two lives instead of one. And when the relationship starts to feel too real, too permanent, too much like the very commitment he spent years avoiding, the excuses arrive on schedule. She's too much, he lives too far. It's never quite right, because quite right was never really the issue. Closeness was. Underneath all of it sits one uncomfortable psychological fact. This has very little to do with ability and almost everything to do with distress tolerance, the simple capacity to sit inside an uncomfortable feeling without needing to immediately escape it. Boredom, rejection, the awkwardness of being bad at something new. Most adult responsibility isn't actually difficult in a technical sense. It's difficult emotionally in the smallest, most unglamorous ways. Answering the email you're dreading, sitting through the meeting you bore, doing the 20th rep of a skill you haven't mastered yet. A man who never built tolerance for that low-grade discomfort will feel adult life as almost unbearable, not because it's genuinely harder for him, but because he never built the callus everyone else quietly built by being forced to. So what actually gets a person out of this? Not, interestingly, the death of the dreamer inside him. Jung himself was careful about this. The Puer isn't evil, and the goal was never to kill the part of him that's still curious, still creative, still capable of wonder. The goal is integration, letting that same imagination finally exist inside a body that shows up on time, finishes the unglamorous parts of the plan, and survives contact with an outcome that isn't perfect. Erik Erikson, decades after Jung, mapped adult development as a series of tasks that have to be completed in order, and the one that sits waiting for exactly this kind of man is what he called generativity. The shift from being someone the world takes care of to being someone who contributes something back to it. Skip that stage, and Erikson's word for what replaces it is blunt: stagnation. Not punishment, just the natural result of a task left undone. None of this gets fixed by a better morning routine. It gets fixed the unglamorous way,
one finished thing at a time. Not the perfect thing, not the thing that proves how special he is, just one ordinary, boring, completed task that he didn't abandon the moment it stopped feeling exciting. A resume that gets sent instead of endlessly revised. A hard conversation that actually happens instead of being rehearsed for the 100th time. Because that's the part no one tells you about becoming an adult. It was never about losing your imagination. It's about finally trusting it enough to test it against something real. The launch pad was never the problem. The countdown has been running for years. The only thing missing this whole time was someone's hand actually going down on the switch. If any part of this sounded uncomfortably specific, that's not a coincidence. That's the pattern doing exactly what it always does. The question now is what you're going to do with knowing its name.